Do you know there was once a man who terrified kings, humbled crusaders, and still died with nothing but a prayer on his lips? He wasn't a tyrant or a conqueror drunk with power. He was something far more dangerous. A man with faith. They called him Salahuddin Ayubi, but the world remembers him by one name. Saladin, the Lion of the Desert. He was born on a night of exile, in a fortress above the Tigris River, as his family fled their home under the cover of darkness. His father, Ayyub, carried the newborn in silence, unaware that the crying child in his arms would one day rule from the Nile to the Euphrates. A passing scholar saw the child and said, "Do not grieve. This boy's shadow will stretch across empires." And so it began, a life forged by loss, patience, and destiny. In his youth, Saladin was not the man the world expected to fear. He was quiet, thoughtful, and drawn more to books than blades. While princes wasted fortunes chasing pleasures, he memorized verses of the Quran and studied the art of rule. When his peers boasted about battles, he listened. When others sought glory, he sought purpose. He served under Nur ad-Din, the ruler of Syria, a man as fierce as iron and as ambitious as Alexander. To Nur ad-Din, Saladin was just a promising soldier among thousands. But in the silence behind his eyes, there was something different. Discipline, humility, the kind of patience that outlives armies. When the Crusaders burned villages along the border, Saladin rode out for his first real taste of war. The ground trembled with hooves, arrows split the sky, and the desert turned red with the blood of believers. He saw not just death, but betrayal. Muslim princes fighting one another while the invaders carved through their people. That night, beneath a sky of smoke and ash, he made a vow. "If I ever hold power, I will unite these lands, or die trying." Fate listened. In 1164, Egypt, the jewel of the Middle East, was falling apart. Nur ad-Din sent his uncle Shirkuh to restore order, and Saladin went with him, a loyal but reluctant lieutenant. Egypt was a land of gold and poison, of whispering viziers and blades behind curtains. When Shirkuh died suddenly, the young Saladin was appointed vizier of Egypt. The Crusaders laughed. A Kurdish outsider, barely 30, ruling one of the richest nations in the world? They said he would not last a month. They were wrong. Saladin moved like shadow and wind. He dismantled the corrupt Fatimid court piece by piece. He drained their treasuries, cut the taxes strangling the poor, built hospitals, and restored Sunni Islam as the spiritual heart of Egypt. He led with mercy, yet ruled with unbreakable control. Even his enemies admired him, saying, "He holds power as if born for it, and praise as if he never sought it." But power invites envy. When Nur ad-Din died, the empire fractured again. Lords and princes tore Syria apart, each one calling himself ruler. Saladin saw his chance, not to seize, but to heal. He rode north, not as a conqueror, but as a unifier. City after city surrendered, not out of fear, but respect. He spared rivals, forgave rebels, and absorbed enemies until one banner stretched from the Nile to Damascus, the Ayyubi dynasty. The Crusaders watched in disbelief. The man they mocked had become the master of the Muslim world. He had built an empire not through conquest, but through conviction. And when his armies were ready, when the deserts themselves whispered his name, he turned his eyes toward Jerusalem. That was when the Crusaders made their final mistake. A reckless knight, Reynold de Chatillon, attacked a Muslim caravan, capturing Saladin's sister and slaughtering the guards under the holy flag of truce. The message was clear. The Christians of the Holy Land no longer feared God or consequence. Saladin gathered his council. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "They have broken the law of peace. They spill blood and call it faith. Then faith shall answer." From the mountains of Syria to the sands of Egypt, the call went out, not for vengeance, but for justice. Imams wept as they prayed. Smiths hammered steel until dawn. And when the morning came, the desert moved. Tens of thousands marched beneath his banner, warriors, scholars, and farmers alike. No crown upon his head, no gold on his robes. Only the sword of the faithful and the cause of unity. He rode at their front, his black horse kicking up dust that seemed to swallow the horizon. The Crusaders called him the devil. But to his people, he was the hand of God. As the sun bled into the dunes, Saladin looked toward the horizon, the road to Jerusalem glowing in the distance. He whispered a prayer under his breath. "O Lord, let justice return to your city." And then the trumpet sounded. The desert roared, and the lion began to move. The world was about to remember his name. They said Jerusalem was impossible to take. For nearly a century, the Crusaders had held it, drenched in blood and crowned with crosses. It was the jewel of Christendom, the dream of kings, and the wound of Islam. But now, the desert was moving again. At its head rode a man whose legend was already being whispered in Europe, Saladin, the Lion of the Desert. The year was 1187. The Crusader lords were divided, proud, greedy, and blind to the storm coming for them. At their front stood King Guy of Lusignan, more politician than warrior, and Raynald de Chatillon, the same reckless lord who had slaughtered Saladin's sister's caravan. He had sworn to kill the man himself. He didn't know he was signing his own death sentence. Saladin's army met the Crusaders near the hills of Hattin, under a sun that burned like judgment. The Christians marched across open ground, their armor boiling, their throats dry. Saladin's men set fire to the grass and surrounded them, choking them with smoke and heat. The Crusaders fought bravely, but there was no mercy in the wind that day, no water, no hope. By nightfall, the desert was silent except for the crackling of burning tents. When the sun rose again, it glinted off a sea of fallen crosses. Saladin had won. He walked among the prisoners, nobles, knights, and kings reduced to silence. When they brought King Guy before him, he offered him water, a gesture of mercy. But when the cup was passed to Raynald, Saladin stopped it. "You did not ask my permission," he said. "You have no right to my mercy." And with that, the lion drew his sword and struck Raynald down. It wasn't vengeance. It was justice, carried out by the hand of a man who had lost patience with cruelty. Jerusalem now lay open. The Crusaders had slaughtered its Muslim inhabitants when they took the city decades earlier. The world expected Saladin to do the same. But when his army entered through the gates, he forbade bloodshed. He walked the same streets once soaked in slaughter, and ordered his soldiers to protect the churches, to shield the Christians who remained, and to cleanse the mosques with prayer, not fire. When the banner of Islam rose above the dome of the rock, there was no roar of triumph, only the sound of weeping. Not of sorrow, but of gratitude. The holy city was free again. Europe was stunned. To them, Saladin was supposed to be a barbarian, a monster. But word spread of his mercy, how he treated prisoners with honor, how he allowed Christian families to ransom their freedom, how he personally paid for those who could not. Even Pope Urban's messengers couldn't twist it. This Muslim king had shown more grace than the Crusaders ever had. But peace never lasts. In the West, a new crusade was born, led by Richard the Lionheart, King of England. A warrior as fierce as Saladin was wise. For 3 years, their armies clashed across the Holy Land, two lions circling the same prey. At Acre, at Arsuf, at the gates of Jerusalem itself, they fought not just with swords, but with respect. Each admired what the other represented: courage, faith, and honor. There's a story, perhaps true, perhaps not, that when Richard fell ill, Saladin sent him his own doctor. When Richard's horse was killed, Saladin sent him 2 of his finest. In another world, they might have been friends. But in this one, they were bound by destiny. Rivals in a war both men secretly wished would end. At last, Richard realized the truth. He could not take Jerusalem. His men were dying, his supplies fading, his spirit worn thin. He sent envoys to Saladin. And so, beneath the burning sky of the Holy Land, 2 enemies made peace. The deal was simple. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim rule, but Christian pilgrims could visit freely, without harm, without tax. It was a treaty built not on fear, but on respect. Richard sailed home, and Saladin returned to Damascus. For the first time in decades, there was silence in the desert. But even legends die. In 1193, the lion of the desert grew weak. Fever consumed him. He lay on a simple bed, surrounded not by gold or guards, but by his sons and scholars. His treasury was empty. He had given his wealth to the poor, his lands to his soldiers, his name to history. A servant wept and said, "My Sultan, you conquered kingdoms and ruled an empire. Why leave the world with nothing?" Saladin smiled faintly. "Because everything belongs to God. I was only its keeper." And with that, he closed his eyes. When he died, they carried his body through the streets of Damascus. a man walked ahead of the funeral, crying out to the crowds, "Behold, the one who conquered the world, and takes nothing with him but this shroud." The Crusaders feared him, the Muslims revered him, and the centuries have not forgotten him. Even his enemies called him the perfect knight. In a world of blood and vengeance, he proved that mercy was not weakness, it was strength. Saladin was more than a king. He was the answer to chaos, the bridge between faiths, and the living proof that honor can survive even in the darkest age. Because true power does not come from how many you conquer. It comes from what you choose to forgive. And that is why they still call him the Lion of the Desert. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to this channel. Also do well to check out other interesting videos from this channel. Thank you.